Every few months, it's someone new. And every few months, it ends the exact same way. They text you every day, sleep over on weekends, tell you things they never tell anyone. And the moment you ask where this is going, they disappear. Or worse, they stay, but the answer never comes. And the strangest part isn't that it happened once. It's that every person you've been drawn to somehow turns into the same situation. The names change. The dynamic doesn't. At some point, the question shifts from why won't they commit to something heavier? Why does this keep happening to me? That question has an answer, and it goes back further than your first situationship. There's a reason your brain keeps steering you toward people who will never fully choose you, and it has nothing to do with luck. This video will show you exactly what it is and why the next one will feel completely different, but end the same way until you see it. Let's start with the part that's hard to hear, but changes everything once you do. When the same outcome keeps repeating with different people, the pattern isn't coming from outside. It's coming from you. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because your brain is running a selection process you're not aware of. Psychology has a term for this: repetition compulsion. It means the tendency to unconsciously recreate emotional dynamics that are familiar, even when those dynamics hurt you. Your brain doesn't seek what's healthy. It seeks what it recognizes. And if emotional ambiguity is what you grew up with, that's what feels like home. So when you meet someone who's clear, available, and certain about you, your nervous system doesn't feel relief. It feels suspicion. This is too easy. There's no spark. Something's off. And you drift toward the person who gives you just enough to keep hoping and just little enough to keep doubting. Because that's the emotional frequency your brain is tuned to. You're not attracting unavailable people. You're filtering out the available ones, and then wondering why everyone you end up with looks the same. So where does this pattern come from? Why does emotional ambiguity feel like home to some people and like a deal breaker to others? The answer almost always goes back to the first relationships you ever had, the ones with your parents. If you grew up with a caregiver who was warm one day and withdrawn the next, who loved you on their terms, on their schedule, when it was convenient for them, your brain learned something very specific. Love is something you wait for, something you earn, something that comes and goes, and your job is to hold on during the gaps. That lesson doesn't expire. It installs itself so deep that by the time you're an adult, you don't even recognize it as a lesson. It just feels like the way things are. Love is supposed to be uncertain. If it's easy, it's not real. If they're fully available, something must be wrong with them. And here's the part that will make this click. A situationship is the perfect replica of that childhood dynamic. Someone who's present but not committed. Affectionate but unpredictable. Close enough to give you hope. Far enough to keep you anxious. Your adult brain calls it a connection. Your nervous system calls it Tuesday at age 7. That's why the pattern repeats. You're not choosing wrong, you're choosing familiar. And familiar isn't the same as good, it's just the only thing your brain knows how to navigate. This leads to something that might genuinely change how you date from this point on. Most people describe their situationship at the beginning the same way. The chemistry was insane. That magnetic pull, the butterflies, the obsessive thinking, checking your phone constantly, replaying every conversation, feeling high when they give you attention and crushed when they pull away. Here's the problem. That's not chemistry. That's anxiety, and your brain cannot tell the difference. When someone's behavior toward you is unpredictable, warm, then cold, close, then distant, your nervous system enters a state of hypervigilance. It's scanning constantly. Are they interested? Did that text mean something? Why haven't they replied? That scanning creates a physical sensation. Elevated heart rate, heightened focus, emotional intensity that feels identical to attraction. Studies on arousal and attraction have shown this repeatedly. When people feel physiologically activated for any reason, including stress and uncertainty, they're more likely to interpret that activation as romantic interest. It's called misattribution of arousal. Your body is anxious. Your brain labels it as passion. So every time you meet someone stable, someone who texts back on time, says what they mean, doesn't play games, your body stays calm. And your brain reads calm as boring. No spark, no chemistry? Next. And then someone ambiguous walks in and your nervous system lights up. And you think, this is it. This is different. It's not different. It's the same pattern in new packaging. The spark you keep chasing is your own anxiety reflected back at you. Now let's talk about your part in keeping the pattern alive, because the other person isn't the only one avoiding clarity. Think about how many situationships you could have ended in week 3. One direct question. Are you looking for a relationship? Yes or no? A real answer would have saved you months, but you didn't ask. Or you asked softly, accepted a vague answer, and changed the subject. Why? Because on some level, you didn't want the answer, not the real one. Because the real answer would have forced a decision. And making that decision, walking away from someone who feels like possibility, is terrifying when your sense of worth is tangled up in whether people choose you. Psychologists call this ambiguity tolerance. People who repeatedly end up in situationships tend to have a higher tolerance for ambiguity in romantic contexts, not because they're patient, but because certainty in either direction is more frightening than the gray zone. A clear no means rejection. A clear yes means vulnerability, real intimacy, real stakes, real potential for loss. The situationship is the compromise. It lives in the in-between, where nothing is risked and nothing is resolved. And for someone whose deepest fear is either rejection or genuine closeness, the in-between feels like the only survivable option. You're not tolerating the ambiguity, you're choosing it because both exits are scarier than the hallway. And there's one more layer to this, one that goes deeper than childhood, deeper than anxiety, deeper than fear of rejection. If you're someone who's been in situationship after situationship, I want you to try something uncomfortable. Finish this sentence. Without anyone in my life romantically, I am. If you couldn't finish it, or if what came to mind was something like alone, not enough, or just blank, that's the root. Because for many people stuck in this cycle, the situationship isn't about the other person at all. It's about having someone, anyone in that slot. A name to think about, a phone to check, a story to tell your friends. Not because the connection is fulfilling, but because the alternative is sitting with yourself. And yourself without a romantic subplot running in the background feels incomplete. Research on self-concept and relationship patterns shows that people with a weaker independent identity are significantly more likely to tolerate situationships, because even a partial connection fills the gap where a solid sense of self should be. The situationship becomes a placeholder, not for a future relationship, but for an identity you haven't built yet. And you'll keep cycling through them until that identity exists on its own, without needing someone else's inconsistent attention to feel real. So how do you actually stop this? Not with a checklist, not with dating rules, not with knowing your worth. Because if you could just decide to know your worth, you would have done it already. You stop it by changing what your nervous system responds to, and that takes practice, not willpower. It means noticing the moment you feel that spark with someone new and asking yourself honestly, am I excited or am I anxious? Because those feel identical from the inside. The only difference is what's driving them. Excitement comes from possibility. Anxiety comes from uncertainty. Learn to feel the difference and you'll stop confusing instability for connection. It means catching yourself the first time you accept a non-answer to "what are we?" and choosing discomfort over convenience. Asking again, clearly, and being willing to hear the truth, even when the truth ends it. It means sitting with the silence that follows, the empty phone, the open evenings, and recognizing that the discomfort of being alone isn't a problem to solve with another person. It's a feeling to move through until it stops running your decisions. And it means this, the hardest part. The next time someone available, clear, and certain about you shows up, and your first instinct is no spark, don't walk away. Stay a little longer. Give your nervous system time to recalibrate. Because the love that's actually good for you won't feel like a high. It'll feel like ground beneath your feet. And after years of floating, that might be the most unfamiliar feeling of all. If this described a pattern you've been living, subscribe. We break down the psychology behind relationships every week. And if someone you know keeps ending up in the same place with a different person, send them this video. It might be the thing that finally makes the pattern visible.